Hello, everyone, and welcome to Perceptions with Chris Goodman. Dear listeners, in this episode I bring to you a conversation with Princewill Osaro Omorogiuwa. Princewill is originally from Nigeria, and he's what you call a self-made man. He arrived in Europe with nothing more than the clothes on his back, got himself educated, and became a serial entrepreneur. He is now a professor of marketing at Hult International Business School, coaching many young people on marketing, branding, business, and entrepreneurship. Of course, the story is more complicated than that, but he will get into that in due course. We met when Princewill gave an inspiring speech about business at my school, and after that speech I thought, I want to be an entrepreneur too. Not that I have a clue of what that entails, but he has this kind of contagious energy and infectious enthusiasm, and I think you'll hear his passion in this podcast. But there's more to the story. To an extent, we talk about business and what it takes to be successful, but you'll soon notice that for Princewill, these are means to an end, and he quickly cuts down to the bare essentials of the value of life and how it is connected to time, the time that we have with the people we love. He gives a very fresh view of what it means to be financially free and great advice on when and how to create Plan B. I hope he's able to carve out some more time for me in future because there's so much more ground I'd like to cover. So I hope you enjoyed this talk as much as I did with Princewill Osaro Omorogiuwa. Hello, Princewill. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you, Prince?
So, we actually met when you came to my school and you held what I can only call a barn burner of a speech about brands, about business, about entrepreneurship, and you set the room on fire. It was awesome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was very nice to be there. I had a really good time. It was very good. I thank you guys for
Also,
having me, really.
it's also interesting to see the type of brands that you put up there, like Atari. And then I'm like, from my generation, do these kids actually know what that is? Like,
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a good one, and I must commend the kids at your school. Big boys and big girls. They have the world at their feet.
they
There's
do.
so much. There's so much opportunity. There's so much for them to accomplish. There's so many challenges the world faces that we counting on that generation of children to help solve some of the world's most intractable problems. So yes, I was very pleased with the opportunity to be there.
Yeah. Uh, it's interesting. You started off your speech by talking about your background and your story.
Yeah.
Could you quickly walk us through that? What's your story?
Oh yeah, where does where will that start from? I think I recall putting up an image there of one of these migrant boats, trying to get into Europe. I put an image up there, to send a certain message. I think the message got across, and effectively what I was trying to say was that 30 odd years ago, 30 years odd years ago, that was me trying to do whatever it was necessary to get a better life. And I thought that I believed, very strongly that that better life was in Europe. Um, I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot since then. 30 years on. I have been through the trenches. I have uh, I've had times where there was nothing to eat. I've had times where there was no place to sleep. I've had times where The only place to sleep, were completed buildings. I have roamed the streets till morning because there was no place to sleep. I've survived on the very, very, very bare minimum. I've been tempted to do things that I knew I would never have been proud of, and I know thankfully some of the values that that we're raised with, kept me strong, kept me going. And I was trying to communicate, with the kids because we were in an educational institution
Yeah.
that what made a difference for me, what changed it, what turned my life around, was the fact that at some point, thanks to thanks to a gentleman I met when I was being deported from one of the North African countries, and who said to me that that I had it all wrong, that changing your geography, changing the geography is not going to change who you are. That if you're an idiot where you're coming from, you can be an idiot where you're going.
Yeah.
That I had to try to develop myself. I had to grow, and that if I could develop myself, it didn't really matter where I was. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter whether you're in Africa, it wouldn't matter whether you're in Europe, that you will be able to make a success of your life. And thankfully, I took that advice to heart, and it took a lot of grace. It took a lot of grace. It took a lot of support, but I was able to get back into education, which I dropped out from, because
Okay.
I was in a university at the time. I was in university, trying to pursue a medical degree,
Oh,
and I dropped out of the university. So at the time, I didn't really have much, So the advice, of course, we give to people, I tell them, don't drop out. You know,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
there's a time for everything, and there's a time for you to study, there's a time for you to sow, there's a time for you to grow, and there's a time for you to reap. So it's been that journey. Eventually, I did get into Europe, but not the way that I was trying to get in, by any means necessary, by sea, by road, I traveled by all means. I remember when I think about it now, it's laughable, but I was trying to cross into which country was that? Not that I was trying to, I did cross into Mauritania in a leaking canoe. Now I think about it, sometimes, when you're in pursuit of something ridiculous, any kind of risk seems worth it,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
was it was it was ridiculous. I can't imagine what I was thinking at the time. But yes, that was things changed when I decided to go back to school. I went back to school. I went back to study marketing, and everything changed for me then. Like literally everything changed. I began. It was as if I was seeing the world through a colored lens, and what my training started to do for me was begin to peel off those colored lenses layers by layers. And eventually I began, I saw the world much more clearer. And because I felt empowered, because I knew a lot more, my confidence grew. And as my confidence grew, the quality and caliber of people I began to interact with changed completely. So when it was time, I mean, when it was time actually for me to go to Europe, got my visas, I actually deferred it because I was so busy doing stuff. And eventually I did go. But that thinking, that idea of, you know what, you need to grow, you need to develop yourself, and everything will happen for you. When I say it now, it sounds like, I got the realization, and then I went to grow, develop myself, and then I went.
Yeah.
That process took 7 years.
Right. Right.
That process that took 7 years, so, you
I've
know,
heard that. I've heard that so many times when people look back and they see it in this linear way, but in reality, it goes back and forth.
yes,
You make
yes,
one step
yes, it
forward, two
does.
steps back. Like,
There were challenges, there were all sorts, but at that point, at that point when I made the decision to go back, I was a believer. I knew without a shadow of doubt that this was the way. All right, that if I developed myself, that anything was possible. I had the benefit of reading some books. I think at the time, and you probably interview a lot of people over time that might say something similar. But the book, and at the time I read it, I probably didn't get the message that I ought to have gotten, but I did get it eventually. That book was Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich.
okay.
And at that and in there, there's something about specialized knowledge, and that got to me, and in the course of my struggles, in the course of my sojourn, I did stumble upon a book that I read and I loved. I didn't know at the time that that book I stumbled upon was a marketing text, but it just felt like me. I got it. It was fun, it was interesting, it made sense. And that's how, when it was time for me to pick a specialized field, I chose marketing. And I wanted to be one of the best at it. 30 years on, while people can judge for themselves, but I did pay my dues. I studied, I mastered it, I taught it, I have trained thousands of people from over 100 countries, since, over the last 25 years. And it's something I do with a lot of pride, with a lot of joy, with extreme satisfaction. I even, built a business around it. So yes, it's been, so what you see here is 30 years. What you see is 30 years in the making. There's nothing like overnight success. People see these and they don't realize the process that you have gone through to get to where you are. People just see the end result. When you
The
tell
result,
people
yeah.
that you dropped out of university, they said, "But how come? But how come you're a professor in a business school?" When you tell people that there was a time in your life where you had no food to eat, where you had no place to stay, you had no place to sleep, and they wonder about how can that be, how can that be you? But it is a process, and the process works. If we understand what it is and we just follow a few very simple laws, very simple rules, then success is possible for anyone, however you choose to define that success. And I was very lucky, that I was very lucky that, that I understood, and even before my professional studies, the power of goals, that I understood that I was never, there's nothing like something for nothing. It doesn't exist. If you want something, you must be ready to pay the price for it. For some of us, that price was, I studied for 10 years nonstop, Chris,
Right.
nonstop for 10 years.
Mm.
All right, from when? From 97 to 2007,
Right.
nonstop. In that 10-year period, that there wasn't a time that I wasn't preparing for an exam, submitting a paper, writing, doing some coursework. For 10 years, Yes, it was exhausting,
You know,
but
I heard a comedian, I forgot his name now, but he said people are jealous of what you have, but they're not jealous of what it took to get you there.
no, no. And
Mhm.
and sometimes when you tell them what it took, they'll tell you, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, I get that's too
You
much.
know,
That's just too much.
they tell you, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But if we just understand that, that success is possible, however you choose to define it. And I'm trying to be careful here because some people will define it in different ways, but success
Mm.
is not about acquisition of humongous amount of money. Okay. But to be clear, people, sometimes I do some work and I get paid, some kinds of money, and people say, but that was only 1 hour. I said, but you don't get it. People pay you these amounts of money after you've become successful at something, not before. So you get the rewards after you become successful. So it is after you have paid the prices, after you have gone through the grind, that is when that begins to happen. But through the process, no one recognizes it, no one sees it. You just see someone who just seems to be you know, you know, following a few simple rules every single day and every single week. And then 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, you say, oh my God, what happened here?
Yeah.
What happened here. So it's what it
Yeah.
is. I tell people the number of days that I have to work in a year, or that I have to physically go in to go lecture. And they said, really? That few? I said, but what do you mean? Do you want me to go in every day? Do you know how, do you know what I have done to get to this point where I'm able to experience that? So just being mindful about how that is defined. The fact that I can uh, find the time to take my daughter to school and bring her back home. For me, it's is a measure of success of the way I have been able to build my life to this
Mm.
point. So yes, it's yes, this is 30 years.
Right. Right. I mean, I think some of the things that you're mentioning in terms of simple rules, like consistency, is something that is a sort of measure of if you manage to be consistent, it's really an investment, right, into your long-term success. If you do just a little bit every day.
Yes, yes, absolutely. There is, we in order for you to be consistent, it's that's one side of the coin. All right, the other side of the coin
Yeah.
is where a lot of us falter. All right, the other side of the coin, because it's difficult to be consistent without discipline.
Right.
Right?
There has to be a
It is
couple.
difficult, to control without discipline. So is that side of the discipline that many of us falter.
Mm,
It is almost impossible, to find someone who is disciplined and consistent. It's almost impossible to find someone who has those, who is able to marshal their innate resources to be both and not succeed.
mm.
All right, it's almost impossible. So when you find people who it's very interesting how we're always looking for those people who seem to have who seem to stand out, etc. I don't think I'm a standout guy. I don't think I'm that person that you will put up and say this is Ronaldo, or this is Messi and all of that. But when you take it across, whether it's tennis and sports in academia, etc. All right. You find that those people who achieve the most are those people who are able to do both. All right, who
Mm.
are able to be consistent. And it doesn't even, it doesn't matter what it is. Even take content creation, for example. People who will succeed in most of those people who will tell themselves they're going to do this once every week, once every month, and they just keep going. All right, 10 years from now, you see what they have been able to accomplish, and you say, oh my God, I want to do that too. But you don't have the discipline. I mean, how are you going to do it if you don't have discipline? And how are you going to stay consistent,
Mm.
without that? So it is, yes, it is a case. It is not very easy, but yes, people have to be consistent. However you define that, all right, however you define that. But it's not only about consistency in doing things. And I say this to young people, that your friends now that you have in high school, your friends now that you have in university, they have to know, they have to see you as a consistent person,
Mm.
that someone of integrity, that when you say ABC, you mean ABC. Because by the time you all hit
Ooh,
40,
ooh.
their mind is made. They know exactly who you are. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? They know who you are. So don't take it for granted.
yeah,
I don't get into WhatsApp groups and just post nonsense, and don't just, if let people take you seriously. Let them know that you're a serious person, you're a serious woman, you're a serious guy.
yeah,
Because by the time you're 40, when people are maturing into their various professions and roles, they want to look at you and say, yeah, that's a serious guy.
yeah.
If we give him this opportunity, we know he will take it seriously because he's been consistent, all
Mm.
right, with the way he's carried himself. He's been consistent with the truths that he speaks. He's been consistent with the way he presents himself, the way he carries himself. So now, by the time they're 40, they know that this is a serious guy, this is a serious lady. That's why you see when people meet, in high school reunions, you always hear this comment, oh, that guy has always been like that.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, that lady has always been like that.
He's just like
Exactly.
that. He's just like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
whether they are referring to something positive or something negative,
yeah.
they will just say that guy has always been like that. So it means that somehow in the subconscious, people have just been keeping tabs. They just know. All right. So that side of being consistent is also important. All right. So it is useful to let young people know now, because now they are 16, 17, 18, 19, they think it doesn't matter, but it does matter. All right. It does matter that people take you seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always emphasize that with my students that they need to bring together what they say and what they do. They got to make an effort.
Yeah.
And, if somebody says to me, yes, Mr. Goodman, I'll do it. What does that mean? Am I going to then get it in my inbox?
Yes.
Are you going to back that up or are you just saying it? And of course, every time you say, yes, I'll do it, and then there are no results, the meaning of what you say goes down.
Yes.
Slowly,
Yes.
gradually. And then people go like, hey, yeah, when he says it doesn't mean anything, right? And that's bad. That's
Yes. And the
really,
moment people,
yeah.
the moment you say something and somebody says, or somebody comes and said, are you sure? Then you know that you're in a deficit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You want to be in a position to tell people that I'm going to be there, and they know you will be there. All right. That it has to be a tsunami, some massive thunderstorm, something act of God that made it impossible for you to be there. So people need to choose the promises that they make very carefully. I can't do it, I can't do it, that's fine. All right. But people need to just make sure that when we talk about consistency, it's not just about the grind. All right. It's
Absolutely.
about everything else that we're doing, because the people that you grow up with, that you went to university with, you went to high school with, that you will work with, they need to, when you're not in their present, they need to be able to say that is a serious guy, that if we give this guy this task, he will execute it. And that's what really matters at the end of the day. That's why people get opportunities. That's why people will invest in your business. Because some
Mm.
guy will say, no, I know that guy. All right. I know him. I know that lady. She's always been serious.
I mean, I also notice if you take that on board and you practice it, you're going to say no most of the time. You're going to say no, 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 and you'll say yes to those things that you really want to do. But
And you see, this is really, really important. What you've said is really, really important. Because one of the quickest ways to failure is to
yeah,
try to please everyone. All right, it's really,
exactly.
really quick, to fail. And also, on the other hand, it's also because when people live their lives without goals, All right, without goals, they will say yes to everything, and then they'll mess up most of them. Now, when you have goals, when you have something that you're trying to accomplish, all right, then those goals will help you filter out the activities that you participate in. It help you filter out the things that you say yes or no to, because some activities will distract you.
Yeah.
All right. Some activities will pull you backwards,
Yeah.
whereas some activities will pull you forwards towards realizing your goal. So when you don't have them, all right, when you don't have something you're working towards, then anything now seems okay to do. And you only have that 24 hours in a day, or really, if you think about it, less than that,
It's
maybe
less than
eight
that.
hours in
Yeah.
a day, discretionary 8 hours in a day for you to do the things that you want to do. So when you don't have goals, then it becomes more difficult. For example, you want to become a qualified accountant, which means that you need to take professional exams. That's something you need to work towards. Now, if you're working towards that and someone comes and says, "Oh, let's go party, let's go clubbing, let's go this, let's go that," no one is saying you shouldn't have time for recreation. All right, but now you know that you can't spend the entire weekend recreating. You know that. You know now that, okay, it's okay if I go out 2, 3, 4 hours, but it is unacceptable for me to spend an entire weekend, binging on Netflix series or Amazon Prime series when you know you got exams. Now you are object oriented. Now you're goal oriented. You know that, okay, I can sacrifice 2 hours to watch a movie just to help me relax and unwind, but that's it. But when you don't have those goals, when you don't have those things you want to accomplish, then it just seems okay.
Mm.
And it totally destroys me when I find young people, bragging about who has watched the most seasons in a series. And I'm saying, are you having a laugh? Are you having a laugh?
I mean, I
You're
was,
spending that, you're squandering that much time.
yeah, I was
Someone
surprised.
else's entertainment. Are you joking?
Have you heard of Squid Game?
Yes, yes.
Like my students were talking that they've seen the entire season.
Yes,
And then I
yes,
looked at Netflix. I looked how many hours. This is
yes, yes.
hours upon hours
Yeah.
upon hours. I was shocked at how many
You
hours it
know,
actually
if
is.
you have if you have realized most of your life goals and you have nothing else to do and all of that, great. But geez, between now and when you are, I don't know which age, now I tell them, I tell the students that, because now they're their early 20s, that I don't want to catch them dead working at 45.
Mm,
By that time, they should be financially free and be able to do the things that they want to do. If you're working, then it's because they want to work, not because they have to work. All right. And it's not because I think they're super clever, not because I think they're super bright, but simply because they've got time ahead of them. They've got time. They're 22 years old, so they've got 20 plus years to make the right decisions,
mm,
to grow in their careers, put money away, invest wisely so that they can buy back the time and spend time doing the things that they really would love to do. Not having to make a choice between attending a meeting or going to watch your son or daughter's recital. I mean, that
mm.
is not the kind of choices you want to be making.
You mentioned last time to do with that, if you are spending time with your children, that you can give them your undivided attention and that your
Yes.
mind is not somewhere else. And that is even for me, like sometimes it's hard. Like I'm thinking about my lesson next, I'm thinking about some meeting, and I'm with my son, and it actually tears me apart. Like I should be just
We've
totally
been
engaged with him.
there.
And it is sometimes really challenging. And I think you really touched on something there because that's the goal. The goal is that you can then, after you've done all the graft, that you can actually be with your family and be present.
Yes, yes. Especially sometimes, I mean, all times that kids grow up is important, but I say to people that, you know, you know, it's only 18 years that they've got to
I
spend
know.
with
Yeah.
you. Like literally. In some countries, maybe even less. It's
Yeah.
18 years. And I'm saying 18 years because if they go to uni, then they've gone to uni. But that's it. It's only 18 years, and it goes like that really,
It
really
goes
quick. You wake
fast.
up one day
It
and then
goes
you're
really
gone.
fast.
So we want to be able to make sure that that we do as much as we can with the time that we've got, and that we make the right choice. And the reason why I'm telling folks, try, 40, 45, is because if people are, if they have young kids, they're going to becoming teenagers and all of that, and you want to be present. You want to be able, yeah, you want to be there when they have challenges. You want to be present. It's not just enough. I watched um, um, a program, and it's a very short series. And I check, it has, I think it had only like 4 episodes, and I watched it because of the title. It's called Adolescent. I'm not doing any promos for them, but there's a part, when the guy says he leaves at 6 in the morning and he comes back. And it comes back at 8 p.m. And there's also a part in the movie, in the series, where we know the guy is 50.
Right.
Okay, the guy is 50. But his son has been arrested for murder. The son is 13.
Right. My gosh.
All right, the son is 13. And there's also a part of it where the wife was saying, we don't really, we don't really know him. He goes into school, comes back, goes out, goes into his room, and that's it. We never checked. We never, but when you look at it, there was, I don't want to say there was no time. No one is judging, but I think that we have, those of us who have seen some of these things play out, in our own lives, have a responsibility to inform people who are much younger about the things that are really, 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 really important, and that when the dust
Yeah.
settles,
Yeah.
all right, when the dust settles, the things that will make you happiest the most is not the fact that you got $10 million in the bank, no matter how much you grind that. It's the fact that you pick up the phone, you call your son or your daughter, and they're happy to pick it up. All right, they're happy to talk to you. They're happy to share with you. One of the happiest moments when your son that picks up the phone to share some good news with you. That is what it is. You got $10 million in the bank, and you pick up your phone to call your kid, and they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Then you fail big time.
Yeah.
Then you fail, and you begin to ask yourself, was it really worth it? And I tell to people like like I said, there's always a price to pay for success. There's nothing like something for nothing.
Mm.
But the caveat is, may the price you pay for your success not be too great.
Okay.
And family is where we draw the line about whether it is too great, or that's where I would draw the line, whether it is too great or not. All right. There are people, with, who've made, stupendous success, and their kids are not willing to bring their grandchildren to them. They want you to bring them. Can you imagine how gut-wrenching that is? How sad that would make that person feel? They've built humongous success, and then they are not in a position to enjoy their grandkids because they had a poor relationship with their own children. And why do we have a poor relationship? Because we didn't invest. I was saying to my son that, some time ago, that, that thing I told you about money, that if you start investing early, in your early 20s or your late teens, by the time you're 40, you will have been able to do quite a bit. I say it's the same thing with your health. If you begin to invest in your health, if you look after yourself from now to 40, your body will look after you afterwards. But it's the same thing with relationships, with with kids and family. If you invest the time and the effort in those relationships, it will pay off again in the end. So it depends on how we'll play it, how we'll define it, but we need to be very clear that the goals that we have are not only financial goals. All right, that we need to have goals for different aspects of our lives, and so that by the time we are much older and all of that, we'll have a fuller, richer life, and not just grind for just grind for the sake of it.
I mean, it's interesting that you use the term financial freedom because that's really what it is. Because if you're grinding and grinding and you're really just caught by it and trapped by it, you're not free. Doesn't matter
No,
how
you're
much
not.
money you
No, you're
have.
not. You're absolutely right. No,
Yeah,
you're
it's an
not.
interesting term, something I'm
No,
going to.
you're not. It's a it's there are many of us there are many of us working really good jobs. There are many of us even in enterprise.
Yeah, yeah.
Who running our own businesses. I happen to be doing both. That do not really know what the point was. And I didn't know what the point was for a while,
Right.
when I got into enterprise 16, 17 odd years ago. I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to run my own business. I knew that it was a bit risky for me to just depend on one source of income. I knew that. But I wasn't still sure what the point was. I know that I wanted to have a bit of free time, but I still wasn't sure what the point was, why I was in business and all of that. And one day the coin dropped, that we're not meant to work all of our lives. We're not meant to exchange time and time for money, all of the time for the rest of our lives. That, life is meant to be enjoyed. For
Mm.
some people, that might be passive income of $2,000 a month to $3,000 a month. For some people, maybe 10, 15, 20, each to their own. All right. But I think it is useful for people to be able to make that determination. How much do I require to survive? Assuming I have, if I've paid off my mortgage, or as we do in Africa, we build our own houses. We don't do this whole mortgage business.
No mortgages?
Nah, no, we don't play like that. We just build our own houses. But if you're in a country where there are mortgages and things like that, what will it take? After you've paid off your mortgage and all of that, then what? Some people think that when they pay off their mortgages, they're free. No, they're not. Even when you've paid off your mortgages, you still have expensive of, in the UK, maybe 800 to 1,200 pounds a month.
Yeah.
If your retirement money is not able to cover that, or if it just covers it, then what? So I think people need to have that conversation with themselves. And I'm telling young people now that once you start working, that should be what you're aiming for, which means that you need to begin to put money away. You need to begin to invest money in whatever vehicles make sense to you in your country. But you need to be able to put money away so that you can
Start
earn some
early.
passive income
Right. Start
over
early.
time. All right. And the most important thing, is the time that you've got. You can do that consistently for 10, 15, 20 years. You're done. That's it. You're able to do it for 30 years. That's fantastic. If you're 20 now, you begin to do that by the time you're 50. That's it. All right. You will never need to, and the best time to start is when the amounts are small. When they're paying you only $1,000 a month, that is the best time to start. Because if you're not able to save $100 out of 1,000, then it is impossible for you to save 500 out of 5,000. Why? Because you don't have the discipline. You have not cultivated the discipline to be able to do that. But once you have the discipline to start when the amounts are small, it becomes so easy. All right, to carry on. In fact, you might find that when you earn 5,000, you are able to put away 1,500 because you have experienced the benefits of it. So you are able to put so much of it away. So that by the time you get to the age of 40, 45, 50, you can choose. You have options. All right, you have options. By time between 45 and 55, you could get laid off at any time. All right. It's a difference between whether you get a panic, whether you have a panic attack, or whether you just smile and just move on. I've got friends who got letters, just when they thought they were at that point in their careers, they got laid off.
Mm,
Some could not recover. Others just smiled and moved on because they had done the needful over the last 10, 15 years. All right, they live in their own home, so there was no pressure. They built their own home, so there was no pressure. They started a small business on the side, so there was no pressure. All right, they had built extra houses, so they're getting some rental income, so there was no pressure. All right, so the key, I find that one of the things that distracts people is their own sense of success. That
right.
when people get a new job or get a new promotion or etc., or they get a big deal, that it kind of makes people feel invincible. It makes them believe that this is going to continue. All
Right.
right. But I caution, and if no one gets anything out of this podcast, let it be this message that the best time to make your plan B is when everything seems to be working right for you.
Right. Okay.
If you don't get anything at all from this podcast, let it be that. All right, because that will keep you grounded. You will plant your feet on the ground. You realize that you're human and that anything can happen.
Anything
And
can
that
happen.
now that business is great, the cash flows are fantastic. Now that you got in this promotion, your income has gone up by so much. Now that you've changed jobs and you're earning this much money, this is not the time to be making drastic lifestyle changes. That this is a time for you to think about plan B. And the simple way to think about it, the simple way to help you that can help you focus on that is just ask yourself that what if this was taken away from me tomorrow?
Right.
What if this opportunity that's generating this much cash flow, what if it disappears tomorrow? All right, what if this job that I have that's paying me so much, what if it is gone tomorrow? Then what next? All right. So not having thoughts about the possibility of things going wrong. All right. And it's not just you trying to be a pessimist, it's just you trying to be a realist. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Things never go right forever. The things that we don't know when it will go wrong. All right. But it will. All right. And you've got to be prepared one way or the other financially, not just for yourself, but once you have family, you've got responsibilities. Once you have parents, you've got responsibilities. So you need to be prepared one way or the other. So the best time is when everything seems to be working.
Right. It
For
just
me, it's like the calm before the storm. I ain't waiting for no storm. All right, you just start preparing.
okay. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people would. I know quite a few people. I was like, "Oh, don't be so negative. Don't be so negative. Well, why are you thinking worst case scenario?" But actually, you're just being cautious. You're thinking long term and
It's
being
it's
realistic.
and you know what? You've said the right word. And that game is long term.
It's long term, yeah.
All right, that whole game is long term. We grew up in a time where our parents expect us to take care of them.
Yeah.
Okay, and many of my friends, my peers, do that. I've been doing that. Those who still have parents, it's just what the expectation is. But in my generation, we don't expect our kids to do the same because they've grown up in a completely different generation. We don't expect it. All right. In Europe, I think that has always been the case. But as more and more of us have gone into the Western world to live our lives, that is now beginning to become our reality. Um, so you got to ask yourself whether, would you be able to? And one of the things my mom always tells me, bless her, she's 84. She
Okay.
says she says
Congratulations.
that old age is very expensive. All right, it's really expensive, medications and this and that, and that is
For treatment,
true.
yeah.
So you've got to, there's no other way. If you want to be financially free, you must be a long-term guy. It's as simple as that. You must be a long-term person if you want to be financially free. There's no way, we would tell people that overnight success takes 15 years.
Mm.
It takes 15 years,
That's a
and
good
it
one.
could even be more.
That's a good one.
But no one is counting. We're not counting. We're not in the business of counting the number of years. We're in the business of just measuring progress today against yesterday. That's what we're in the business in. All right. Our job is just to make sure we're making progress. That if I check last year with this year, have I made any progress? And the answer is yes. And progress might be that last year I had only $1,000 in my savings account, emergency account. This year I've got $3,000. So I made progress. All right. It's just progress that we're just trying to make progress. That's it. All right. And if you keep making progress, one day someone points you out in the crowd and say that's a successful guy, or that's a rich guy. But he doesn't look it. But yes, wealth is always hidden. It's always hidden. We don't, it's hidden. All right, the guy buys a brand new car and you say, but how did he make the money? Of course. What generates the money you don't see, is hidden. His investments are not written in front of you. It's not there.
Right.
It's all long-term stuff. And I say, oh my God, this guy has bought that building. But yeah, of course. But he's been buying buildings for the last for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
What do you mean by he's bought a building? The building is $3 million. Yes, of course. He's been doing this for a very long time, but so yes, long term it is. And that might be one of our challenges in this day and age of nanoseconds, of short attention spans, and wanting something now and now. I don't know if people still believe in long term. If people are prepared to delay gratification.
Yes, yeah.
For the promise, all right, for the promise that on the Monday morning, they can go play golf. On the Tuesday morning, they can be on the beach, reading a book by their favorite author. I don't know if people, I'm driven by that. I'm driven by by the promise that that is possible, to live the life of your dreams, to see the world, to experience things, and not having to take permission from anyone, that I can control my time. For me, that is it's not money, it's just the freedom to control your time. You get what I'm saying? That, there are no constraints on, you get what I'm saying? If you have the means and you feel like visiting your cousin in the US, you said, okay, I'm going tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? You don't need to seek permission. And I think people should want that. You know what I'm saying? If your kid has a challenge in school, you must just go. If a kid is unwell, you must just stay home for 2 or 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and just be there without, it's the dream. People should want that.
Yeah.
I was telling a good friend of mine who I was doing a reference for his, I was, I know he wants to do a doctorate, and I was trying to encourage him. And I said to him, how old is your oldest son? He's about 8 years old. And I said, you got to kill this thing before he becomes a teenager.
Yeah.
I said, you got to kill it. I said, you've got to kill it. I said, don't be doing this when he's 15, 16, 17, because I'm telling you for free, this thing will suck you like you have no idea. All right, 12, 13, he's discovering himself, he's becoming a big boy and all of that. You want to be emotionally present. All right, I said, because you'll be doing this thing, you work from home, you're home, but I'm telling you now, you won't be present, even though you're home. So get this goddamn thing out of the way now.
Especially as a dad, right?
Yes, get it out of the way. We're not joking, all right? You're trying to raise boys in the United Kingdom or some other part of the world that we were not socializing from the beginning. All right, there's so much stuff that you will need to learn from them and understand. All right, we can't be having undivided attention when it comes to things like that. That was what did it for him. It wasn't about, do it now because, it might get you a promotion tomorrow. Get it done now, right? So that you can have time. When they need you, you'll be available emotionally,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Princewill,
So,
I'm aware of the time. Uh,
yes, time.
I've
Yeah.
got show notes
Well,
here. There's so many more things I'd love to talk to you
yeah,
about.
so you might have it in series, part one, part two, part three.
On the finishing note, can I just ask you one more question?
Of course.
Yeah. So if you are a young person that wants to get out there and start a business, what would you say about taking risk? If they're a bit scared to take a risk, what's one thing you could say? Because obviously, let's say
Somebody,
you want to start a business, you want to get out there, but you're just like, what if it all goes wrong and the failure? How do you cope with that?
that is such a good question. But what if it all goes right? What if it all goes right? What if it all goes right?
Right.
All right, so you haven't done it before, so yes, but what if it goes right?
What if it
How
goes
come we
right?
never
Yeah.
tell people that, okay, what if it goes right? I have, gosh, I think from 2008 up until I think maybe last year or 2 years ago, I was starting a business every two
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And many of them have worked, some haven't. And someone says, "Oh, but you just like taking risk and da 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 da. Da. You've put in money into this and da 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 da." I said, "No." I said, "You don't understand." I said, "It's not a risk." I said, "No." I said, "It is regret that I'm trying to
Mm.
avoid."
Yeah.
I say it's a regret that I'm trying to avoid. I don't want to look back, 10 years and say, "Oh, I wish I did that."
I could
I
have, I
wish I
could have, I
did that.
should have. Yeah.
I should have done
I
that.
should have.
I want to say, yes, I tried, it didn't work.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tried, I didn't enjoy it, so I stopped. Or I tried, it didn't work, it failed. Now I know what not to do.
Right.
But I don't want to have doubts in my mind as I'm getting older and say, "Oh, I wish I'd done that. Maybe that would have been successful. Maybe that would have." Nah, no, 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 no. So if they want to do it, there's nothing would teach them about success better than failure.
Right. That's
Nothing will
awesome.
teach them success better. So they get in there, they get into the thing, and then, you know, it doesn't, you only fail when you don't try. You only fail. That is when you know that you failed big time because you didn't try. You're always a better person because you tried.
So it's like true failure, actually,
You are already one step up because you
because you're
decided to
trying.
risk, because you decided to try.
Yeah.
So you've got to try. Come on. So you tell them, if they come to you and tell you I'm trying, they say yes, of course. Some of the ideas will look nasty, some of them will look like, but these kids, I respect them so much because some of the ideas they come up with won't make any sense to us.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Can you imagine,
We're on a
can you
different level, right?
imagine
They
in the early
yeah.
2000s, in the early 2000s, when they were trying, to try and explain the business model of Meta, then Facebook, to
Yeah.
someone who is 45, 50 years old, or when Jeff Bezos is trying to explain that to somebody about selling books online, to somebody who is 45, 50 years old, they
Yeah,
will
yeah.
think you're nuts. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. We don't get
And
it.
so,
Yeah.
yes, so we tend to be very mindful, with the youngsters and say, you know what, yes, if you believe in this enough, of course, there are certain things that just make sense, whether something can work or it can't work. We teach this in business, you know. But once someone, if they believe that something can work because they have certain insights that we might not have, then, let them go. If it doesn't work, they should wear it like a badge of honor that, I tried this, it didn't work. And then they will find something else that they can work. You know how many things I've done in my time? How many things that I've done that didn't work? Today we run businesses in 3 countries. We support people in maybe 10 different countries. But, but some of the things didn't work. I put in a lot of money, but when you've done it so many times, and it's not working, you just say, well, you know what? Just shut that business down. It's okay. All right. No, it's true. And you don't.
Yeah.
There are no emotions about it. You know what I'm saying? There's no, just shut it down. This is not working. We've launched lots of products that didn't work. Okay, this is not working. Okay, stop flogging the dead. Let's kill it. Just, because we've done it over and over again. There are no emotions attached. Are you with me? It's a business that will make money. If it's not going to make money, let it be. If you've got, one of the advantages of running multiple businesses is that if one is not working and you close it down, you can take some, you can take some of the staff and redistribute them, and redeploy them, into other functions. But
Right, right.
it
Okay.
is what it is. But please, regret is. I mean, people
Of
are still
course. Yeah.
people are still choking on the dust of their own regrets today because they didn't do something, and then they find somebody else just killing and say, "Oh my God, I wish I've done that."
I wish I
But
did.
well, the next best time to start doing it is now.
Mm, mm.
You still got time. It's
Yeah.
now.
Wow, Princewill, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for your time
Take
and
care.
take care. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right then.